The no fishing sign appeared overnight like a bad rash. I saw it at 6:30 in the morning, freshly drilled into the wooden post by the bank of my lake. Yes, my lake. It's on my property, fed by a spring that runs directly through my backyard and has been in my family for over 30 years. I fish there every Saturday morning, cup of coffee in hand, just me, the water, and the quiet. But there it was. A generic aluminum sign slapped on with the HOA's tacky logo and bold red letters, "No Fishing, HOA Rule 14.7b. I nearly choked on my coffee. It didn't take long to figure out who was behind it. Darlene Overby, the HOA president, had a habit of acting like she owned the whole zip code. Middle-aged, always wore pastel cardigans, and had the personality of a malfunctioning smoke alarm, shrill, annoying, and impossible to ignore. She once tried to fine my neighbor $500 for having non-regulation wind chimes. I stormed back to the house, fuming, and pulled out the property map. My name, Trent Daniels, was stamped all over the deed, especially the section that clearly showed the lake was on my land. The HOA didn't have jurisdiction over it, not one bit. At 8 sharp, I was at Darlene's door. She opened it with that fake, pleasant smile that always made my stomach turn. "Trent, what a surprise," she said, voice like a phone menu. "Why is there a no fishing sign on my lake?" "Oh, that." She waved her hand like it was no big deal. "It's just a precaution. We've had reports of children fishing unsupervised." "Liability concerns, you understand. On my property?" "Well, technically, it's within the visual domain of the neighborhood." "Visual domain," I cut her off. "That's not a legal term." She crossed her arms. "It's about community standards, and the board agrees." "You mean you agree?" "I never got a vote. The board has the right to make emergency rulings without full votes." I stared at her. "You trespassed. That sign is coming down. If you remove it," she said, her smile sharpening, "you'll be fined. $200 per violation." I left before I said something that would get me arrested, but that was the last straw. Darlene wanted to play power games? Fine. But she forgot one thing: she wasn't the only one who could make rules. That night I drafted a letter, then I had it notarized. Then I posted 6 copies of it around the neighborhood, on the clubhouse door, the pool gate, the community dock, and yes, right next to Darlene's precious sign. It read, "Notice. Effective immediately, the private lake located behind 112 Willow Creek Drive is closed to all swimming, boating, kayaking, and HOA-affiliated events. This property is privately owned, and trespassing will result in prosecution under Local Code 23.8. All previous informal permissions are hereby revoked." The next morning, the yelling started. By 8:30 that morning, I was sitting on my porch with a legal pad in my lap and a thermos of coffee, watching the chaos unfold like a matinee performance. A small crowd had gathered near the lake's edge, clustered around one of my notices. There were raised voices. Someone held up their phone, probably recording. A woman in a floral sun hat snapped a photo and stalked off with a muttered curse. I didn't bother getting up. I wanted the message to sink in. The first knock came at 9:05. It wasn't Darlene. It was her lapdog, Greg Hensley, the HOA treasurer, tall, thin, and always looked like he was recovering from bad sushi. He had a clipboard tucked under his arm and the nervous energy of someone about to recite lines he didn't believe in. "You can't block access to the lake," he said, skipping pleasantries. "I didn't block access," I said. "I revoked it. There's a difference." He adjusted his glasses and squinted. "The lake's used for the annual summer splash. That's less than 2 weeks away. Not my problem. You'll need a new location. That'll throw off the whole budget, then rework it." He looked down at his clipboard like it might offer a new argument. It didn't. "You're creating division in the community." "No," I said, "I'm creating boundaries. The HOA ignored mine. Now I'm enforcing them." Greg left without another word. I watched him shuffle off, his clipboard flapping like a defeated flag. Less than an hour later, code enforcement showed up. A woman in uniform named Officer Delgado stepped out of a white city vehicle, glanced at the signs, then walked up my drive with a professional calm that told me she'd seen stranger things. "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" she said. "Go ahead." We had a complaint about obstruction of public access. I handed her the folder I'd already prepared. Inside was the property deed, the original survey map, and a letter from my attorney verifying the lake's private status. She flipped through the pages, nodding slowly. "This is thorough. I figured you'd be stopping by." She looked toward the lake. "So the HOA used this for events?" "Used to," I said. "They were allowed informal access for years, until they tried to claim authority over it." Delgado raised an eyebrow. "You mean the sign, installed without notice or permission? That was the last straw." She closed the folder and handed it back. "You're well within your rights. I'll file this as a non-issue." Then she tilted her head. "Did they actually drill into your property to post it?" "They did." "Then you might want to talk to our property crimes unit. That's technically vandalism if they didn't have consent." Now that was interesting. "Appreciate the tip," I said. She gave me a nod and walked off, scribbling something in her notebook. By early afternoon, the neighborhood Facebook group was lit up like a Christmas tree. Someone had posted a photo of the sign next to mine, captioned, "HOA vs. homeowner who owns the lake." The comments were pure gold. "Wait, the HOA doesn't control the lake." "Darlene's gonna have a meltdown face with tears of joy. Did they seriously just ruin the summer splash for everyone?" That last one came from a user named Noel M., who I recognized as Noel Myers, the HOA secretary. The fact that she was publicly posting that kind of comment told me things were starting to crack. At 4:30, I got the second knock. This time, it was Darlene. She didn't look like herself. Her usual pastel attire was replaced with a navy blazer, and her hair, normally a helmet of curls, had collapsed into a frazzled mess. She was holding a manila envelope and trying to smile, but it looked more like a grimace. "I'd like to talk," she said. I stepped aside. She sat stiffly in the armchair while I stood by the fireplace. I wasn't offering coffee this time. "I think there's been some misunderstandings," she began. "Let's skip the preamble." She set the envelope on the table and slid it forward. "We'd like to propose a reinstatement of event access to the lake, with your written permission, of course. In return, the board will issue a formal apology and acknowledge your ownership rights." I didn't touch the envelope, and the sign, removed, immediately. I leaned against the mantel. "This isn't about access anymore, Darlene. You trespassed. You drilled into my land. That's criminal property damage." She stiffened. "Surely we don't need to involve lawyers." I pulled out my phone and opened an audio file. It played her voice, recorded from our earlier doorstep conversation. "If you remove it, you'll be fined. $200 per violation." Her expression fell. "I've already forwarded this to property crimes, along with video from my trail cam showing your maintenance guy installing the sign. At night." She tried to speak, but I cut her off. "This wasn't a mistake. It was an overreach. You tried to assert control over something that never belonged to the HOA." She stood abruptly. "This could reflect poorly on the neighborhood." I crossed my arms. "Only if people start asking how many other rules you've invented out of thin air." That made her pause, just for a second. And in that second, I saw something flicker behind her eyes: uncertainty, maybe even fear. She left without another word. The next day, I called a meeting, not an HOA meeting, but a neighborhood gathering at the community park. No agenda, no minutes, just residents. By 6 p.m., over 40 people showed up. I brought copies of the deed and even enlarged the survey map on a poster board. I explained everything: how the HOA never had jurisdiction, how the sign was installed illegally, and how the board had acted without a vote or consensus. Then I opened the floor. Noel spoke first. "I had no idea they were posting rules without board input. That's not how it's supposed to work." Then Janice from 3 streets over raised her hand. "They fined me last year for a hose reel on my side yard. I checked. I never approved that rule. None of us did." It snowballed. People started comparing notes, unexplained fines. Rules that never went through a vote. Questions about where HOA dues were actually going. That night, a group of us formed an independent audit committee not officially sanctioned, but entirely legal under state transparency statutes. We petitioned for financial records, meeting minutes, and voting documentation. Darlene tried to block it. She failed. 3 days later, she resigned. Greg followed. Turns out, the HOA had been operating on what amounted to an unwritten monarchy: no proper records, no accountability, just a handful of people making up rules and enforcing them through threats. It didn't take long for the rest of the board to collapse. We held new elections. I didn't run. Didn't need to. We voted in a new, temporary oversight council made up of residents from every street. Their first act: dismantling all non-voted rules and conducting a full financial audit with the help of a retired CPA who lived on the corner lot. They found almost $20,000 in unexplained maintenance expenses with no contractor receipts. That's when the police got involved. Turns out, one of Darlene's cousins had been submitting fake invoices for landscaping services that never happened. Money was being funneled into a private account. The paper trail was sloppy but obvious once you knew where to look. She was arrested, charged with fraud and embezzlement. Greg was named as a cooperating witness. The lake. I kept my restrictions in place for a while. Just until the new board settled in and earned my trust. Eventually, we worked out a formal agreement: event access with 30 days notice, written approval, and strict boundaries. The no fishing sign, I kept it, mounted it in my garage. Right next to the trail cam photo of the guy installing it at night. A little reminder of what happens when people try to take what doesn't belong to them. And every Saturday morning, I still fish. The first real consequence of the fallout came in the form of a county subpoena, hand-delivered to the new Oversight Council's mailbox by a uniformed deputy. I wasn't there to watch it happen, but the council chair, a retired Navy engineer named Luther Hargrove, called me the moment he finished reading it. "They're opening a formal investigation," he said, his voice low and steady, like someone giving coordinates before a missile launch. Bank fraud, misuse of funds, unauthorized contracts. Looks like Darlene's cousin wasn't the only one feeding off the system. I didn't ask how he got that information. Luther had served on aircraft carriers during the Gulf War and once told me he could trace a paper trail through a hurricane. If he said it was bad, it was worse than bad. Over the next week, the neighborhood transformed from a place of passive compliance into a buzzing hive of discovery. Residents who had never spoken more than a polite hello were suddenly cross-referencing invoices, digging through old newsletters, and comparing stories about strange charges or denied requests. The council set up a temporary office in the community center with a folding table and a coffee machine. Every evening, someone new came forward with something just a little off. "I got billed for tree trimming last year," said a man named Victor, who lived 2 streets over. "Only problem is, I don't have any trees." A woman named Clara brought in a stack of emails she had printed out: denied permit requests for minor backyard improvements, all marked with the same digital signature, D over by admin. The same signature showed up on dozens of questionable approvals for landscaping contracts, all routed through a shell company registered to a P.O. box in another county. I focused on what I did best: documentation. I installed floodlights and added a second trail camera, this time aimed at the HOA's maintenance shed, which sat unused since the board collapsed. Not because I suspected new mischief, but because I knew how people like Darlene operated. Power addicts didn't go cold turkey without withdrawal. It didn't take long for something to happen. At 1 a.m. on a Tuesday, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I pulled up the live feed and watched a man in dark clothing pry open the maintenance shed with a crowbar. He moved quickly, but not smartly. The camera caught clear footage of his face as he loaded boxes into the back of a dented silver SUV. I called the non-emergency line, gave them the footage, and by sunrise, the SUV was impounded and the man arrested. His name was Raymond Torres, former HOA maintenance coordinator, and according to records the council dug up, the listed owner of that shell landscaping company. During his arraignment, he tried to claim it was all authorized storage retrieval, but the judge wasn't buying it. Especially not after the sheriff's office found shredded checks and a stack of falsified invoices in one of the boxes. The county prosecutor added obstruction and destruction of evidence to his charges. The judge denied bail. By then, the local news had caught wind of the story. A reporter from Channel 7 showed up during one of the council's open meetings, camera crew in tow. I stayed in the back, out of frame, while Luther gave a brief statement about transparency, accountability, and the importance of community-led oversight. He didn't mention my name, but I got a nod on the way out. The broadcast aired that night. The footage of the lake, the signs, and the busted SUV played in a tight 30-second segment between a car dealership ad and a weather update. But it was enough. The next morning, Luther called again. This time, his voice held a trace of urgency. "You need to see something," he said. "Come by the office." I arrived 10 minutes later. He handed me a folder, thick and dog-eared. "You remember how Darlene claimed the HOA had liability concerns about kids fishing on your lake?" I nodded. "She was trying to cover herself. We found this buried in the archives." Inside the folder were 3 incident reports, all dated within the same month, 2 years prior. All involved minor injuries during HOA-sponsored events held near the lake. A twisted ankle, a scraped knee, and one case of a kid falling off a paddle board and needing stitches. None of these were ever disclosed to residents, Luther said, but they were submitted to the HOA's insurance provider. I flipped through the pages, reading the payout claims. Each one had been filed by Darlene directly, and each included inflated costs, ambulance rides that never happened, medical supplies that weren't used, and in one case, a bill from a clinic that didn't even exist. "It gets worse," he said. The insurance company flagged the last one as suspicious but never followed up. Probably wrote it off as clerical error, but we think she took the money. How much? A little over $9,000, enough to draw attention if someone cared to look. They did now. The council turned everything over to the county district attorney. Within 48 hours, a warrant was issued for Darlene's arrest. She was picked up at her sister's house 2 towns over. Her mugshot ran on the evening news, along with a statement from the DA's office confirming felony charges for insurance fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The community's reaction wasn't outrage, it was relief. People finally understood that their frustration hadn't been paranoia. They weren't imagining the rules changing overnight or the money vanishing into vague maintenance lines on newsletters. It had been real. It had been deliberate. And now it was over. The new Oversight Council moved quickly. They froze all HOA spending, terminated every remaining contract, and hired a forensic accountant. They also drafted a new Charter 1 that required recorded votes, public financial disclosures, and term limits. Nothing could be passed without a 2/3 majority from verified homeowners. They offered me a seat on the permanent board. I declined. I'd done what I came to do. Instead, I suggested they reserve part of the community center for resident workshops teaching people how to read bylaws, how to file a petition, how to challenge fines legally. Knowledge, I explained, was the only vaccine against power abuse. They liked the idea. Voted it in unanimously. As for the lake, I kept the access agreement in place but added 2 new clauses. First, any event had to include a certified safety officer. Second, the HOA would carry its own event liability insurance, no more piggybacking on my homeowner policy. I still posted a sign by the dock. Not "no fishing." Not private property. Just a simple message on a wooden plank carved by a neighbor who did woodworking on weekends. Respect the water. Respect each other. Every Saturday, I still head down with my old tackle box. I fish in peace, not because I won a battle, but because I helped end a war no one knew they were fighting. And if anyone forgets how it started, I've got the trail cam footage and a garage wall full of reminders. 2 months passed, long enough for the neighborhood to settle into its new rhythm. The fake politeness that used to hover in the air like static was gone, replaced by something sturdier mutual respect. Even people who'd kept to themselves for years started chatting during yard work or waving when they passed on morning walks. It felt earned, like we'd all been through something that cracked the fake veneer and forced the real community to the surface. The Oversight Council, now operating under the name Willow Creek Homeowners Committee, had shifted focus from damage control to reconstruction. They held open-air meetings every other Sunday. No more closed-door sessions or unexplained decisions. Residents came with folding chairs, lemonade in hand, and left with clear notes on what had been discussed and voted on. Meanwhile, the legal case against Darlene progressed faster than anyone expected. The DA's office wasn't just pursuing charges for financial crimes anymore. During the forensic audit, the accountant discovered a series of falsified maintenance inspections filed under Darlene's digital signature. One of them reported that the community playground had passed a safety check, dated 2 weeks before a child broke his arm stepping through a rotted wooden slat. The child's parents, who had been told at the time that the incident was just bad luck, were now cooperating with the investigation. The playground had never been inspected. In fact, the last legitimate inspection had taken place more than 3 years ago. The fake report had allowed the HOA to pocket what should have gone toward repairs. That changed the charge sheet. Now the DA was adding criminal negligence and endangerment of a minor. When the news broke, it hit harder than any financial scandal. Money could be repaid. Broken bones. Trust shattered over a child's injury? That didn't wash out so easily. The prosecutor scheduled a preliminary hearing for mid-August. I was subpoenaed as a witness not for the playground incident, but to testify about the pattern of deceptive practices. My trail cam footage and recorded audio were now key exhibits. I hadn't planned on seeing Darlene again, but the system had other ideas. The courthouse was cool and clinical, with the faint scent of industrial-strength sanitizer clinging to the air. I waited outside the courtroom, flipping through my prepared notes when the DA approached me. She was a sharp-eyed woman named Marissa Coe, late 30s, no nonsense. "You're the Lake guy," she said without looking up from her tablet. "Guilty. You'll be the first witness. Just stick to what happened: sign installation, threats, and how the HOA represented their authority. Don't editorialize. I'm not here to spin it." She paused, finally meeting my eyes. "You're doing the neighborhood a favor," I nodded. Just didn't expect to do it in a courtroom. When I took the stand, Darlene was already seated across the room in a gray suit that looked a size too big. Her hair was pulled back, her face pale and unreadable. She didn't look at me once. Maybe she couldn't. I answered each question clearly, walked the court through the events when the sign appeared, what she said, what I did in response. I handed over the audio file and explained how I'd obtained it. Then I described the camera footage of the maintenance worker trespassing at night. When Marissa asked me why I'd taken the steps I did, I kept it simple. She tried to use fake authority to control something she didn't own. When I pushed back, she threatened me with fines and legal consequences she had no right to impose. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was an abuse of power. Darlene's attorney objected halfway through, claimed it was speculative. The judge overruled. I stepped down. The next witness was the forensic accountant. He laid out the financials like he was reading a grocery list: dates, amounts, missing receipts, overlapping vendor IDs. Then came the parents of the injured child. That part was hard to watch. The mother's voice cracked once, but she kept going, explaining how they'd trusted the HOA to handle safety, not knowing a falsified report had cleared a structure that hadn't been checked in years. By the end of the day, the judge ruled there was more than enough to move to trial. Darlene's bail was revoked. She was led out in handcuffs. Back in Willow Creek, the Oversight Committee moved on to Phase 2, rebuilding trust. They launched a volunteer-based maintenance team, funded by a temporary HOA fee freeze, and supplemented with donations from residents who could afford it. The old playground was shut down and fenced off. A local carpenter, Luther's nephew, offered to build a new one at cost. Kids even got to vote on the design. One Saturday morning, I walked down to the lake and found a group of teenagers at the dock. They weren't fishing, just sitting, legs dangling over the edge, laughing at something on a phone. They froze when they saw me, unsure if they were allowed. "Hope you remembered to sign the event log," I said, keeping my face straight. They blinked, confused, then I cracked a grin. "I'm kidding. Enjoy yourselves, just don't leave trash behind." They relaxed, smiled back, and went back to whatever they were watching. That night, I got an email from the committee. They were naming the new playground after the kid who broke his arm, Sammy's Park. His parents had given permission, and he was excited about it. They included a photo of the ribbon-cutting ceremony scheduled for the following weekend. I attended not because I had to, but because I wanted to. People brought picnic blankets, coolers, even a few guitars. The mayor showed up. So did a reporter from Channel 7. Luther gave a short speech and handed out certificates to the volunteers who'd worked on the project. When he called my name, I shook my head and stayed seated. He didn't insist. The kids tore through the new playground like a stampede. Laughter echoed across the park, bouncing off the trees and drifting down to the lake. Afterward, I walked home slowly, passing houses where people had once peeked through blinds when anything looked slightly out of order. Now, they waved from porches. One guy offered me a bottle of iced tea from a cooler. Another handed me a flyer for the upcoming community potluck. It felt different now. Real. At home, I opened the garage and looked at the wall where I'd mounted the old sign. I considered taking it down, but then I left it, not out of spite, as a reminder. Not to me, I didn't need it, but to anyone else who might forget how fragile power becomes when people pay attention. A week later, I got a letter. Not from the HOA, those days were over. It was from Marissa Coe's office. The trial had ended in a plea deal. Darlene pled guilty to fraud, negligence, and conspiracy. She'd served 2 years in county and pay restitution. Raymond Torres took a similar deal. Both were banned from holding any position of fiduciary responsibility for life. There was a note at the bottom, handwritten, "Thanks for standing up." Not everyone does. I folded it carefully and placed it in the same drawer as the original property deed. Then I went down to the lake, pole in hand, and cast a line. The water was still. The dock creaked softly beneath my feet. No signs, no rules, just peace. Earned the hard way.